What's a typical cycle for you now?
Chris in an off season, if he's doing more than 500 milligrams of test by itself, that's an aggressive off season.
Really? Wow.
What's up guys, Derek from ReplaceMoreDates.com. Today we're going to be talking about Chris Bumstead's steroid cycles. Dave Palumbo was talking in an interview with Chris Bumstead and Ian Vieira, and Ian's Chris's coach, and basically they stumbled across the question like what he takes for a standard off-season cycle, and Ian was quick to outline how Chris doesn't take that much, and he's never used more than 500 mgs of test in the off-season.
I mean, obviously, speaking for Chris, obviously, as you know, with his autoimmune stuff like that, never any point where he's pushing anything ever, whether it's prep or off-season or anything.
The average person would laugh.
They would laugh.
You wouldn't believe it.
In off-season, if he's doing more than 500 milligrams of test by itself, that's an aggressive off-season.
Really? Wow.
And he's never done growth hormone in his life. I'll speak for that for him. Never touched it.
Wow.
Never used it. Doesn't use insulin. Never has used it. He's using no drugs other than a half cc a test twice a week. That's it. Like
my training wouldn't have changed at all, but I didn't want to push anything without the prep coming because of my health stuff.
Right.
So of course we keep training because that's what we love to do, but I didn't want anything else to have to change from my kind of coasting, being healthy throughout the year.
Yeah, Chris has always been. I mean, I can speak because I'm obviously doing his protocols. I mean, he's never needed much. It's always been very conservative, and we've just kind of kept it there because he's continually succeeded with what we've been using. So there's no reason to push it. And then obviously when the autoimmune kind of came more into play, then there was even more of a take a step back and just be like, hey, we don't need much. Let's just keep that in our mind. Because like you said, it's so easy to get into that routine of especially when you get into prep and your mind starts to play with you and you're like, I need more.
Right.
I'm starting to lose muscle. I need to add a drug. I need to up the dose, up the trend, up the Winstrol. It's so easy to get into that, push more. And like you said, it's all bullshit for the most part. I mean, taking 300 milligrams of something versus taking 500, it's, what I mean? Most times you look a little better with the less because, like you said, the toxicity is lower. You feel better. Your appetite's better. Everything's just working a little more effectively and more efficiently. So, we've always been, big believers in that. But, times like this, especially with Chris and then, with the no-shows, it's just even reinforced that right now,
A big part of it when I started, too, was Ian kind of came in as, family, and it was, most of it was kind of keep your my brother safe, and it was, minimal, and I kept seeing improvement. I'm still 25 years old. If I can't be making I'm in this age, then, there's no way I'm tapped out of my genetic potential.
Right.
But you got, 35. I'm 10 years below that. So I can still make changes. I've adapted my training. I'm not as strong probably as I used to be. I don't deadlift, squat 600, 700 pounds every week, but I'm trying a lot different, smarter. I feel good. I feel healthy, and my body's still improving. So I wouldn't change anything.
I received a lot of messages about this to give my stance on it, and the fact is a lot of people are overlooking some very, very obvious facts here. So Chris, he's only been doing this for 5 to 6 years or something. He was, even as an amateur in Canada, he built the majority of his size within the first couple of years. If you go look at his first contest, he's obviously smaller than he is now, but he's not way off. He's put in a significant amount of work to put in slow, consistent gains over the course of the 5 to 6 years since that show, whenever it was, if he was 19 or something. But he's hyper responded, and he was, a good, he obviously has insane genetics. You don't have to talk about how obvious it is that he responds well. And he's just muscular in general. But the fact is he's at the top of his weight class. There's weight classes in classic physique. And what benefit would there be to him taking gobs of gear in the off season? I'm quite sure, I don't know exactly what his stage weight is. I think it's in the mid 220s. And for his height relative to the weight class, he can't really put on much more muscle. So for somebody to think that 500 mgs of test is, baby doses for somebody who is, from day one to current packed on probably the 3/4 of his progress was made in the first couple of years. And then since then, he's maybe put on a few pounds of contractile tissue per year consistently. And I think he reached the top of his weight class pretty damn quickly. And he's just been refining his physique for a while now. So what is being overlooked and is very obvious, I thought, is that they're outlining his off-season dosages. Off-season, you're in a surplus of calories. You have increased ability to recover. Everything is in favor for needing less gear. You don't need more to retain what you have or anything in a deficit. We're in a surplus where recovery is significantly enhanced. You're in a surplus of protein, a surplus of carbs, a surplus of fats. You have the building blocks for muscle tissue. You don't need gobs of gear to pack on more than a few pounds of contractile tissue in a year. And that's exactly what he's doing, in my opinion. And at this point, I think he's just refining. So it's like all you're doing at this point is focusing on weak parts, because he can't really do more. Like, he's doing what he can, given he also has a health condition, but also given his weight class limitations. Like, he can only do so much with his off season given the limitations he has, and it does not require huge amounts of gear to push it beyond that. Like, just look at him from day one on his first show, and he, objectively, even from a, just a logical perspective, even the most moronic of fucking idiots are not going to be taking more than 500 mgs a test on their first cycle. And most people are going to, at least now, I would hope a lot of people realize that that's probably overkill too for a first cycle. And I think the high likelihood is that Chris did not exceed that for his first, couple cycles. And then thereafter, he was already pushing pretty damn close to within limitations of stage weight, of his limitations on a bodybuilding stage. He only did the open class for the first couple of years, as far as I know. And then he was in classic shortly thereafter, where he had limitations on his weight and caps that he had to stay within. And he was already within just a few years having to play within weight limitations. So for somebody to pack on a handful of pounds per year, do you need more than 500 mgs a test? No, realistically, it's not like he's an open class bodybuilder like Ian is. And obviously you don't want to push things too hard when you have a pre-existing medical condition. So it sort of, works in his favor that there's these weight caps to begin with. And just at the end of the day, the thing that's being overlooked is they're talking about off season. Like I mentioned, when they get into pre-contest, that's where DHT derivatives are thrown in at the end. That's where hardening agents are thrown in at the end. That's where trenbolone might be thrown in at the end for, antagonism of glucocorticoid receptors to prevent muscle catabolism and, get a recomp effect that you would otherwise not get from other anabolic agents. There's things that he's going to use pre-contest that are going to put his, state of health in jeopardy, but he's not going to do that for more than, 4 to 8 weeks a year. And the off season, the rest of it is probably just, cruising on TRT, maybe coming off to clean out once in a while, once a year for a short span of time, and then, going on a moderate dose of test and refining his physique in the off season. And then come contest, that's where things ramp up a bit near the tail end. But, I feel like this is a very logical conclusion that can be made, and I'm not sure why everyone's calling him out for lying. He's not an open bodybuilder. His progression of his physique is very reasonable to expect within the dosages provided, and they're not touching on contest prep. If they did, and I'm sure they didn't touch on it on purpose, because that's where the dosages are going to start to ramp up a bit, and that's where more other compounds that worked as adjuncts on top of the test are going to be thrown into the equation, as well as other things that are going to be deleterious to his state of health. But they weren't talking about that. They're talking about off season. So that's all you really need to know. When you're in a surplus, you don't need a shit ton of drugs to grow. You guys have seen me talk many times now about how more in the data, even more is better until it's just not. And there's a significant diminishing returns effect with all these drugs, whichever anabolic steroid you're talking about, even if it's testosterone itself, there's a significant diminishing returns effect as you start to taper up the dosages. And even the other day, I posted an anadrol study that showed that the difference between 50 milligrams per day and literally doubling the dose to 100 milligrams per day was not that significant, and certainly did not justify the spike in liver enzymes you would get from that, the spike in all of the deleterious outcomes to your health that come along with that double dosage. At the end of the day, this is longevity too. Your longevity in the sport is going to be determined largely by your drug intake and your health relative to that drug intake. So if you can gain an extra 0.9 kilograms in a cycle by doubling your dosages, or you can gain 0.9 less than that, but still gain 75 to 80% of what you would have gained otherwise, but then down the line, you can do more bulking phases with a reasonable level of health, which is going to be better long-term for actually packing on tissue. It's going to be the lower dose, more moderate approach longer term, where you can maintain a reasonable state of health without jeopardizing your entire career for an extra, 10% or 15% of gains during each cycle where you just wreck your health. So take that in mind, guys. Like, the data is there. The anecdotal reports from bodybuilders are there too. They all reinforce that, they're cognizant of this now. A lot of them, at least. There was this big push for more is better not that long ago. And I think recently it's kind of coming to the surface that less is more. And a lot of times it's not less is more as in you're going to gain more muscle by taking less. It's that in the grand scheme of things, you're inducing a significantly greater level of oxidative stress and health consequences in general to your body by taking these higher dosages. And while in the short term, it might yield, a chunk or like a fraction of greater gains, in the long term, the guy who's packing on 10 pounds of stage weight consistently for years on end, or 5 pounds once they get more advanced or whatever, but they're consistent with it and they can maintain a high level of health for long term and continue to pack on that weight, they're going to be the ones who win out at the end. Like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. I'm sure you've heard that saying a million times, and it's kind of like worn out and people are annoyed of hearing it, but it's really true at the end of the day. Because if you can keep a good state of health and have a 20-year career versus have a 10-year career and burn out and have like a heart attack because you had to double your dosages for another 20% result, like, what's the logical outcome? Especially if you have a weight cap too and a health condition. Like, everything leads to me believing this guy. So I think he's telling the truth, and I think it's just some very glaring, obvious facts are being overlooked that simply weren't touched on in the interview. And I'm sure they didn't want to get into that, so they didn't touch on it, and that's fine. They're not forced to talk about that shit. The fact that he even openly discussed the off-season portion, I give kudos for that, because most won't do that, especially people with sponsors that, otherwise would probably not like their athletes openly talking about this stuff. So good on them. And I remember in one of his like pre-contest prep videos, they were talking about like diuretics and diazide pre-contest and stuff. And they're pretty like stand-up dudes and honest for talking about that stuff in the open, because most pros are just gonna shit on you if you even ask them that question, and they get mad about it in interviews. Like, I've seen so many times on RX Muscle, Dave tries to like ask a very reasonable question, and then the pro just like skirts around it or gets butthurt. So good on Chris and Ian, in my opinion, and I think they're telling the truth. So take from that what you will. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you think he's lying, or do you think what he's saying makes sense? Let me know. Drop a comment, helps the algorithm. Like the video, subscribe, follow me on Instagram at @moreplates_more_dates, Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, check out my turnkey pre-workout formulas below, as well as my cognitive enhancing nootropic formulas that I developed myself, that I used throughout my university years to stay locked in, and nowadays in my working years to stay focused for 12+ hour work days and support cognitive health and whatnot. So, as well as anything else I'm affiliated with below. So thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.